It's my great pleasure to introduce Jane Hemenway, who is a 30-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is a day of spectacular women. In a lot of the current controversy about the FBI, we've heard people talking about the intrepid agents whose names we do not know. Come out and have a seat there. Well, this is brief. We do not know. The people out there who are working largely unsung with tremendous courage and dedication and integrity to protect us and our country. Jane Hemenway has been one of them. She is the real deal. Jane was sworn in at the Washington field office in 1984. She was one of the few women that year to complete the grueling law enforcement training at the Quantico Marine Base. And from early days, she had a talent for the complexities of working with sources. I can tell you, as someone who's made a career in journalism, that's really complicated even when nobody's life is on the line. When she was one of the few women that year, one of her early successes involved turning up, sort of following a lead, a tangential lead. This led to the targeting and arrest of a murderer involved in multiple murders and kidnapping. Her talents led on to work in counterintelligence, which we might call spy catching, with the FBI's New York office, which is considered the flagship of the FBI. For this, she studied Russian in an intensive training course at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. Her track record in Russian intelligence matters led to her becoming the first female full-time counterintelligence confidential human source coordinator. I'll leave it to Jane to tell you what that means in practice, though I will add that in her case, she brought to this work the modernization of the concept of a source and of tools to work with that. And after years of, I stand in awe of this summary in her bio, source work, undercover work, terrorism, and foreign counterintelligence work, Special Agent Jane Hemenway retired in 2014. We are privileged to have her with us today. After her remarks, she's agreed to open the floor to questions. Some topics or specifics might be off limits due to the sensitivity of her work, but she has generously offered to field what she can. I'll be moderating questions from the floor after her remarks. So will you please join me in welcoming another one of this country's great servants, Jane Hemenway.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much, Claudia, for that kind introduction. I have long admired your fearless journalism and on some of the most important issues of this day, of our time. And welcome to our panelists today, Susan Gordon, invited guests, and members of the Independent Women's Forum, which is providing such a critical voice on the major policy issues of the day. I'm sure you all understand that this is a private meeting, and nothing that I say today is representing the U.S. government. They are my personal views. All of it is open source and has been made unclassified much earlier. Yes, I was a G-man for 30 years. But, as you can see, that never fit me. It was a little bit like having a suit that you always wanted to like, but when you tried it on, it never quite fit. I took a pass on G-Lady, and since this is a family program, I'll skip what I was called, and one of the first wave of women going through Quantico, the FBI's version of basic training. Think G.I. Jane meets a lot of blue suits. My father told me as I was entering, Jane, you're about to join this group. The men will never accept you because of the shape of your skin. But they did. They did, and we were able to work side by side for many, many years, 24/7. My background as the daughter of a State Department diplomat helped considerably. I well remember my first exposure to Russian intelligence growing up in Moscow, which was guessing where the KGB tail car behind us, and then holding on tight as my father sped down the back streets to try to elude them, or at least to make them work a bit. These early experiences led me to a long and interesting career. There were many successes along the way, and none of which I can really talk about today. Most of my sources are still being used. But the tougher issues are, what are the threats we face today, and are we prepared to meet them? In trying to answer these questions, I should be clear that I am not from a policy background. My perspective is what is often called a street agent, working sources, trying to understand patterns, and ultimately whether or not someone is telling the truth or lying. There could be a lot riding on that judgment. My career is actually a good example of zigging when everyone else is zagging. And in those early years, the powers that be actually looked down upon foreign counterintelligence. It was a bit of a backwater, and certainly not as sexy as bank robberies, La Cosa Nostra, kidnappings, and tracking down fugitives, which the men thought were real sexy law enforcement. I got a huge break when I was assigned the New York office, where a small but growing group of agents were convinced that foreign intelligence had a bigger mission. As one of them said about jihadists, they hate our world, they hate our lifestyle, they hate everything we have, and they want to destroy us. So, what's it like being on the front lines? Let's start with the operations base for the Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTF, which is based in New York City. It represents one of the best examples of coordinated intelligence gathering in the world. It was founded in the 1980s. I can't tell you where it is, and nobody should. If we could pan a drone camera around the room at the JTTF, we would see almost all men in classic bullpen with the usual accoutrements: family pictures, wanted posters, inspirational messages. The ladies' room has enormous pictures of handguns and pearls, handcuffs and lipstick. It looks a little bit like Nicole Miller with a bit of kink, I guess. Girly in a law enforcement kind of way. In the early days, the stereotypes you're probably thinking about are true. Yes, they were mostly white males in dark suits with government gray desks. The steno pool was down the hall because most of the men did not do their own typing. They dictated their notes. It was quite quaint. Then something happened, terrible and deadly, 9/11. After 9/11, a tech guy came to my desk, put the first computer I ever had for myself onto it, and said, "Thank President Bush." So I did. Welcome to the land of lowest bidders for almost everything. Unfortunately, as Aldous Huxley reminds us, history repeats itself. That men and women do not learn from the lessons of history is the most important of all lessons that history has to teach. I would like to use a timeline to show how intelligence gathering has changed and how the Russian threat has morphed into something new, but just as dangerous as I knew as a young girl in Moscow. There were 4 touch points along the way: Lee Harvey Oswald, Robert Hansen, John O'Neill, and finally, Sergei Tretyakov. First, Oswald. When I was in Soviet school in Moscow, my parents believed in total immersion. I had pictures of baby Lenin and baby Marx in my books. I wanted to be a young pioneer, the Soviet communist group that I thought was a little like the Girl Scouts, and it was. But please don't hold this against me. It was around that time that Lee Harvey Oswald walked into the American consulate in Moscow. He had defected to Russia, but he wanted to return to the United States and have his citizenship reinstated. His documents came to my father's desk, and he looked at them very carefully and put them on the bottom of a large pile of requests. In his view, Oswald was a traitor, and he should never be allowed to return to the United States. After we returned to the U.S., the next Foreign Service officer assigned to the case put Oswald's application at the top of the pile and allowed him to return to the United States. Think about how the course of our history would have changed if Oswald had never gotten out of that pile. My point is, the people on the front lines, those charged with determining who gets into this country, have to be independent thinkers without a PC bone in their bodies. No bureaucratic nonsense, no desk jockeys second-guessing, no politics. Maybe that sounds a bit naive, but I fear the whole process of determining who is a threat to this country too often drifts away from actual facts to how can we accommodate this person for whatever reason. Second, Robert Hansen. In 1987, when I came to New York, I was assigned to Hansen's squad, which, among other activities, was using wiretaps to try and determine what Russians in this country, what the Russians were up to. This was part of a large electronic surveillance operation we had set up in Manhattan. Remember, the Cold War was far from over. The undercover operation was called Pocket Watch. All of this has been in the New York Times, so it's completely unclassified. We used a shell company as a front for our activities. I had an alias, which I can't tell you. What happened next has been called the worst intelligence disaster in U.S. history. Hansard had volunteered several years earlier to spy for the Russians. Among other things, he gave them specific names of Russians who had been working on U.S. sensitive matters. He betrayed Dmitry Polyakov, codenamed Top Hat, who was a CIA informant for 20 years while he rose to the title of general in the Russian army. Polyakov was subsequently exposed by CIA's Aldrich Ames. Their Hansen in many ways. Polyakov was arrested in 1986 and executed in 1988. Many others lost their lives. Other than 9/11, of course, one of the worst days of my career, was when a group of agents showed me materials that I had developed, which Hansen had downloaded and printed and given to the Russians, printed from a computer in Washington headquarters where he had been promoted. Yes, that's right, promoted. And with all due respect to my former colleagues, keep in mind, Hansen did this for many years before he was caught. The hard truth is that there could be a Hansen at work today, despite all the precautions and the new procedures put in place since that time. My message, having lived through this, is assume nothing. The Russians like big targets, and they like small targets. If you have business that puts you in contact with Russians, you need a very sophisticated compliance officer who knows tradecraft and technology. You can have employees being offered large sums of money and not even know it. I assure you, there is recruitment going on 24/7 on top of the hacking and disinformation, and there are Americans who actually hate America, who want to do America harm. The Cold War was never over. It may have paused a bit, but it's just shifted battlefields. Third, John O'Neill. The name may be familiar to some of you who saw a PBS documentary a few years ago called The Man Who Knew. O'Neill became a special agent in charge of the National Security Division of the FBI in 1997, which was in the New York office where I was also working. He was my SAC. To say he was larger than life is a vast understatement. He was tall, funny, told great jokes, sometimes off color, and he didn't watch his language. There are hundreds of examples of this. After a trip to Saudi Arabia with director Louis Freeh, following the Khobar Towers bombing, they got back on the plane and Director Freeh expressed enthusiasm that the Saudis would cooperate more fully with the investigations. Wasn't that a great trip? The director offered. To which O'Neill responded, "You've got to be kidding. They didn't give us anything. They were just shining sunshine up your fill in the blank." For the next 12 hours, there was silence. O'Neill created the Al-Qaeda desk in New York and started talking about an obscure jihadist named bin Laden, and almost no one paid attention. Through the middle and late 90s, he started to draw a picture of Al-Qaeda as events unfolded, including the American embassy bombings. He was credited with creating a template for successful international terrorism investigations that we still use today. I can assure you he did not do this in a library. John had a complicated personal life, which would emerge a lot later, and he was out actually every night with his counterparts from intelligence agencies all around the world. Yes, he worked them, and worked them hard, at now gone lanes and other bars that attracted New York mix of celebrities, writers, and people in the shadows who might be up to something. Most of all, he disdained the bureaucracy. At one point, I needed to get approval to have a source travel to a sensitive location. My request got held up in the bureaucracy until John came back from Yemen, and reading it, he quickly read it. He looked at me and said, "Do you need this?" And I said, "Yes." End of discussion. Signature, John O'Neill, just like John Hancock, big and bold. Throughout 2000 and 2001, John felt more and more that bin Laden wanted to attack the United States. His style grated on some important people, and eventually he left the Bureau in 2001 to become the head of security of the World Trade Center. When he told a reporter that he had taken a job at the World Trade Center, the reporter said, "At least they're not going to bomb it again." O'Neill replied, "They will probably come and try to finish the job." He started on August 23rd, 2001. He told a friend on September 10th something big was going to happen. He was last seen running into the South Tower on 9/11. He was 49 years old. John was in no way a choir boy. But the hard truth is that in this line of work, choir boys don't really get the job done. I'm not condoning late night after late night, but I fear that that type of person that John was wouldn't stand a chance of getting hired in today's PC environment. John was an intense patriot. He completely agreed with Ronald Reagan's strategy for the Cold War. We win, they lose. He drew bright lines. The loss of any American to terrorism affected him deeply. I don't see a lot of O'Neills on the horizon. I see a lot of perfect resumes, summer internships, the ability to make an Excel spreadsheet. The spreadsheets don't make people want to talk to you. John knew that in his bones. John would have loved the story of Sergei Tretyakov. They were both big, manly, and great storytellers. Tretyakov's code name was Comrade J. To quote him, "Everybody wants to be James Bond," he said, "but I'm the real James Bond, and we don't operate like the movies." If John O'Neill was an FBI agent who was larger than life, Tretyakov was definitely made from the same cloth, only Russian style. Sergei Olegovich Tretyakov was the SVR's second-in-command of their New York City office. The SVR is the new name for the old KGB. Same brutal organization with a name change. Tretyakov was in charge of running all SVR intelligence day-to-day operations. All 60 intelligence officers had to report to him every day. He oversaw the handling of every foreign source working for Russian intelligence in Manhattan, all 150 of them. That's right, 150. He personally directed every covert operation that the SVR launched against the U.S. in the city. He was the keeper of the keys, the SVR's most sensitive secrets, working in place for the FBI for many years before he defected. Names of foreign diplomats spying for Russia in the United Nations. The identity of a Russian immigrant living in the U.S. who was delivering millions of dollars worth of stolen medical research to the SVR. The disclosure that the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service embedded a deep cover officer inside the $64 billion oil for food program administered by the UN before Saddam Hussein was toppled. The Russian operative, working under diplomatic cover, became a pivotal player at the UN humanitarian aid program and was able to use that position to help Russia steal millions of dollars that was supposed to go to starving Iraqi women and children. Claudia knows this very well. Investigations by the UN and by the U.S. congressional committees had already revealed that nearly $500 million were diverted from the corrupt UN program into Russia. Tretyakov's work for the U.S. tied the SVR and the Kremlin directly to the UN thefts. It was the smoking gun. Russian intel circumvented the UN's checks and balances system. When Russian President Vladimir Putin was told about the looting, rather than stopping it, Putin rewarded the deep cover SVR officer by giving him one of Russia's highest medals. Why did Tretyakov defect? Why did he decide to betray his native land? Why did he decide to spy for the United States, its most hated enemy? In his own words, he said that his chief motivation was growing disgust with and contempt for what was happening in Russia. I saw with my own eyes what kind of people were governing the country. I arrived at the irrevocable conclusion that to serve those people is immoral. I wanted nothing to do with them. The second motive is also quite profound. Tretyakov wanted to provide a better future for his daughter in a country that had a future. In October 2000, Tretyakov defected with his wife, Helen, his daughter, Ksenia, and their cat, Matilda. Probably the first cat defection. 3 weeks later, Robert Hansen, my former supervisor, was arrested for espionage. I'm not sure the timing was the coincidence. Fast forward to the UK 2018. As we've been discussing past Russian challenges and terrorism issues, let's fast forward to the present. The British have named another pair of alleged GRU operatives, Russia's military intelligence, for a nerve agent attack on a former Russian spy, Skripal, and his daughter in the UK. British police traced the suspect's journey on CCTV, no less. I was in the UK 2 weeks ago, and that is all you heard on their television. It was amazing. The pair traveled from Gatwick Airport to a hotel in East London, and then twice to Salisbury. There they sprayed a military-grade nerve agent on Mr. Skripal's front door. It was concealed in a bottle of perfume modified to carry poison, and it was recklessly discarded, resulting in the death of a local. Theresa May told the House of Commons on September 5th that not only did the two men work for the GRU, in Russian they pronounce it GRU, the operation was almost certainly approved at a senior level of the Russian state, meaning Vladimir Putin. This may be reminding you of the Alexander Litvinenko case, murdered ex-KGB in London. Litvinenko was given radioactive polonium in his tea at the Millennium Hotel on November 1st, 2006. The Journal of the U.S. Intelligence Studies, the Intelligencer, lists 54 cases of people dying that they tie to the Russians. In Wet Affairs, Part 2, Peter Olson lists a table that has significant murders or attacks related to Putin's regime. The bottom line is that Vladimir Putin's regime is at war with the West. As Max Boot wrote in the Washington Post, Russia has been waging a war on the West for years. We just haven't noticed. Or perhaps World War II General George Patton said it best: prepare for the unknown by studying how others in the past have coped with the unforeseeable and unpredictable. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Jane, if
Oh.
would you like to, you don't have a mic, you want to stay at the
No,
podium?
sure.
Okay. Dave was very generously offered to take questions. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi, you mentioned John O'Neill and
Yes.
how he probably wouldn't get hired today.
Right.
And given all the issues with being in counter intel and a 700,000 security clearance backlog,
Right.
what would you recommend to the industry for vetting people when they have to go after people who aren't choir boys but balance, Russian espionage recruitment?
Well, I think they should not go after. They should cast a wide net, and O'Neill should be a template for what agents have to be diverse, which they are, and it's an interesting study in sort of paradox. When Louis Freeh was the director, a edict came down: you can't drink with your sources. Well, if you don't drink with Russians, they won't trust you. They won't give you any information. So agents were put in a catch-22. Do you drink with a source? Do you not drink with a source? It's very difficult. So there's black, there's white, and there's gray. But I would say they should cast a wide net.
Why did it take so long to apprehend Hansen when Ames had been? Why did it take so long to apprehend Hansen when Ames was caught and he was, well, more easily found than Hansen? How come the same thing one thing didn't lead to the other, in other words? Given that both of them were working with the same assets.
That's a really good question, and the answer probably is just due to the sort of stultifying effect of bureaucracy. People will call up things and say, this is wrong, and the bureaucracy just punches it down. It was pre-lie detector tests, and the bureaucratic class, as it were, because all bureaucracies are the same. The American bureaucracy is like the Russian bureaucracy. So they didn't want to think that one of their own could actually be a spy, when one of your own could quite easily be a spy. So when the alerts went off on Hansen, they scapegoated the people who actually did call him out, which is very unfortunate. Yeah.
Did your father ever find out why Oswald was put on the top of the list? No?
The person who followed him in succession and at the State Department just felt sorry for him, this poor boy who's left the United States, needs to come back. Well, the poor boy assassinated John F. Kennedy. It's just tragic. But it's also a reminder of how one person can do a lot. And in a bureaucracy, even in a bureaucracy, if you have, and we do have, dogged agents who work 24/7, who are out there fighting the good fight, regardless of, situations with the paperwork and putting something that shouldn't be at the top of the pile. It's the old expression, beg forgiveness, not ask permission, that kind of thing. But it's the O'Neill way of working a case. And O'Neill drank with his sources. And he was really successful. Yeah.
Do you think that the political charges, counter charges, or focus on the FBI right now will have any lasting detriment to the agency's general function?
That's a really good question. And I've read about some of the actions taken before and after the election, and I find a lot of them extremely deeply concerning. The average agent is very determined to get the facts, to do it right, the who, what, where, and when of a case. And I hope that the changes that do need to be made in the management structure are made, and the agents can resume doing what they do best. In the New York office, it was sort of interesting. The new director came to visit, and it was right after there was we had the bicycle attack incident with a terrorist who killed a number of people. And the new director was given, this is what we're doing in New York today. That cases of our informants being overseas, we really didn't focus. We don't focus on the political machinations of what's happening in Washington, D.C. We do our job. And to me, that's the beauty of the Bureau. Men and women who sloggedly do their job. So to me, I do think the Bureau will recover. The Bureau does need to make some changes, but I think I have the utmost regard for agents after working with them for 30 years.
Like I said, she's the real deal.
Hi, my name is Ken Meyercord. On the FBI's most wanted poster for Osama bin Laden, they charge him with complicity in the East Africa embassy bombings, but they don't charge him with complicity in 9/11. How do you explain that?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure of the answer. I didn't write up the one. Yes, please, I didn't write that.
I think you'll have something to say about that.
Okay.
My own theory is that the FBI asked the CIA for permission to interrogate Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was in Guantanamo. The CIA said, "I'm sorry, we can't let you do that, but we'll provide you with a transcript of his confession." And the FBI said, "We don't work that way. If we can't interview KSM, we don't have any evidence linking." And this is, we don't have any evidence linking Osama bin Laden to 9/11. And that's what the spokesman for the FBI said when someone asked him, "Why aren't you charging him with 9/11?" We don't have any evidence.
Wow. Thank you.
You think that's possible? Explanation.
I have no idea.
Well, I have a question.
Oh, and I did want to mention something, because this is brand new and hot off the press. The Bureau has a new program called Protected Voices. Your voice matters, so protect it. And what it is 12 short videos which hope to mitigate the risk of cyber influence operations targeting U.S. elections. So they've released 12 videos, and some of them, the 12 areas are social engineering, creating strong passwords, using Wi-Fi, safety, and more. So please check it out, because it's a very good program. It's brand new.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Sue Gordon, and that is, in your career at the FBI, what was really satisfying and what was not so much? If somebody in his or her early 20s, or her or his in this forum, is thinking of going into a similar career along some of these proliferating axes that we're now seeing, what would you tell them? What's good, what's bad?
I would say, and she answered this, what a lot of agents say, every day is different. Every single day is different. I loved working sources. I loved working with people. I loved having them help the United States of America pursue the U.S. goals and missions. Undercover work was nerve-wracking. It's a little bit like improv theater, only, it's just, you don't want to mess it up. So you have this, please don't mess it up. And you're targeting hostile intelligence service officers who are quite brutal. So there's a danger element to that. So it's, you work 24/7. You do that because you love it. And it sort of gets under your skin. And I never thought I would do it for 30 years. I never thought that when I got married and had children, I'd still be an agent. I didn't think motherhood and raising a family was compatible. Although I did know female agents who did do undercover work pregnant. I found that fascinating. I didn't take time off. But my husband, you have to have a supportive spouse, whose father was an FBI agent. So when I met him, he was not afraid of the gun. He was like, "You like this. You do well at it. You're good at it. You should continue. Don't quit." What I found, too, is the older I got, the more I could mentor younger agents. And I recently met a young male agent who is now a headquarters supervisor. And he introduced me to his wife, saying, "This is the woman who taught me all about sources. She taught me everything I know." And the wife looked at me and she said, "I've had male agents come up to me thanking me for my husband, helping them, but I never knew that's where it came from." So the mentor aspect is wonderful. You feel like you're contributing, and it's just an amazing area for women. It really is an amazing area. Thank you, Claudia.
Yes, ma'am.
This is just a sort of light, fun question that is
Sure.
feeding off of the first question that Claudia asked Susan earlier. Have you seen the show The Americans, and how realistic is it?
I have seen it. I've seen parts of it. Because my kids were kind of youngish, I couldn't watch it in front of them because it's very sexy and violent. But I think it's very well done. I really liked Homeland. I thought that was superb. I really like 48 Hours. It's a pretty fantastic show. My problem with a lot of these shows is that when you come home after working a really long day, you don't really want to turn on a show like that because it's exhausting and it's kind of like work. It's very weird. It's like, no, I need a break from this. After 9/11, I came home and I realized that I was taking the job home with me. My daughter looked at me and she said, Mommy, I want my silly mommy back. And I realized that I came home with the expression of death and despair. And literally, my phone was ringing off the hook from people who wanted to talk to me. I wasn't at the office because we had a different off-site office. And I was running around recruiting sources, having to push information into our intelligence group. But I was no longer the silly mommy. So those shows are great. I love them. I also love the fact that they're there. I just had Mission Impossible. And although I love Mission Impossible because I love the foreign language ability, I love the fact that they were all over the world. I loved, it was, changing identities and your hair and your makeup and everything. That was a fantastic show. That was my show. That's what drove me into it. My mother was very upset that I had joined. She was a journalist, and she didn't think the FBI did much, maybe handled walk-ins. And later, after I had worked on the October Surprise Task Force, traveling around the world, interviewing terrorists, interviewing the people who had kept our diplomats hostage, and the go-betweens that helped us, flew to Germany, spoke German to the Iranian who helped us. My mother said, Jane, I was wrong. You have had a very interesting career. The shows are great. I love them. Miss Congeniality is one of my personal favorites. My daughter saw it when she was a little girl at a sort of a sleepover birthday party. So all the girls were twittering, oh, Jane, it's Elizabeth's mom. I loved Sandy's accent, her German accent. She speaks impeccable German, and her dirndl and her outfit was phenomenal. You don't see that much in U.S. movies, and the reason why is her mother was German, so she speaks German flawlessly. It's fantastic. So, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Jane.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege to have you. Thank you. Yes.